On the 22nd of June 1941, the largest invasion in human history commenced, when almost 4 million Axis personnel and 600,000 motor vehicles, along with 600,000 horses, invaded the Soviet Union. In the previous episode, I talked about German plans for invasion. This time around, we'll take a look at the first phase of the actual operation, discussing events that took place between June and September. As I mentioned in the previous video, Germany desired Finland's and Romania's participation for obvious reasons, but they needed more time, so the planned date of the 15th of May had to be moved to late June. The Balkan campaign and late spring floods also contributed to the delay, but then 153 German divisions, with 19 panzer and 15 motorized divisions, attacked Soviet positions, along with 14 Finnish and 21 Romanian formations. These forces were subordinated to 3 army groups, North, Center, and South, while the Northern Theater was responsible for operations along the Finnish border. The main objectives were Leningrad, Moscow, and the Volga. They had to be reached before the winter, while German forces in the rear were to mop up remaining units and partisans. On the Soviet side, the first echelon consisted of 2.9 million men in 171 divisions, with another 57 divisions in the second echelon still mobilizing. However, they had 14 million men in reserve, with at least basic military training and plenty of tanks, artillery, and airplanes, although maintenance and readiness standards were very poor. Stalin still thought Hitler would not attack already in 1941, so he dismissed all such reports as disinformation, including the ones coming from his trusted sources. The attack commenced shortly after 3 a.m., with an artillery barrage and the bombing of major cities all the way to Kronstadt and Sevastopol. Foreign Commissar Molotov addressed the nation, but Stalin did not. He first ordered a counter-offensive, which was completely unrealistic, then left for his dacha, from where he emerged 2 weeks later. In Germany, both Goebbels and Hitler announced the invasion, calling it a European crusade, one that would save the continent from the Bolshevik threat. By that time, the initial ground and aerial attacks paralyzed most Soviet units. More than 3,000 aircraft were destroyed on the ground by the Luftwaffe within 3 days. Air supremacy was quickly achieved, although Moscow could not be bombed due to the presence of strong anti-aircraft defenses. Army Group North and its 4th Panzer Group broke through 2 Soviet armies and stopped a counterattack. In early July, it reached the Stalin Line and quickly captured Pskov, reaching Leningrad Oblast. It was now only 250 kilometers away from its primary objective, the birthplace of the Soviet regime. In the center, 2nd Panzer Group crossed the Bug River, bypassed the Brest fortress, and headed towards Minsk, while 3rd Panzer Group rolled towards Vilnius, bypassing Soviet 3rd Army. Soviet mechanized and cavalry units launched a counterattack at Grodno, but they were ineffective against German infantry and artillery, which were strongly supported by the Luftwaffe. The Red Air Force in this section of the front had been destroyed on the ground, so the Luftwaffe gained a free hand. 2 Soviet armies were destroyed, 3 others suffered heavy casualties, losing 324,000 troops and more than 3,000 tanks. Mass panic among civilians and the troops was countered by the NKVD with executions. Even General Dmitry Pavlov, commander of the Western Front, was tried and executed for his failure. His German counterpart, Fedor von Bock, commander of Army Group Center, received orders from Hitler to stop his panzer forces until the infantry units catch up, as those first had to eliminate the Minsk-Bialystok pocket. Heinz Guderian, who led 2nd Panzer Group, disregarded the order and pressed on, so by early July, after some dispute between Bock and Commander-in-Chief Walter von Brauchitsch, the panzer groups resumed their attack without waiting for the infantry. In the south, the German forces had to face the Pripyat marshes and strong Soviet formations led by Marshal Semyon Timoshenko, a capable leader. The Carpathian Mountains divided Army Group South into two, and since Hungary's participation was not anticipated, German and Romanian troops had to move carefully without exposing their flanks. Still, 1st Panzer Group broke through Soviet 5th Army. A counterattack by two mechanized corps was then defeated by anti-tank fire and the Luftwaffe, but another Soviet attack followed, this time with 4 mechanized corps and their 1,500 tanks. After a 4-day battle, they too were defeated. Soviet troops retreated to the Stalin Line to defend Kiev, while Romanian 3rd and 4th Armies and German 11th Army invaded Moldavia and soon crossed the Prut River. Hungary joined at the end of June, sending its Rapid Corps and some other units to Ukraine, plugging the gap. Up north, after Soviet planes bombed major Finnish cities, Finland joined the war, although its forces would be concentrated near Leningrad in order to recapture the isthmus and the city of Viipuri that had been lost in the Winter War, while German troops moved towards the strategic port of Murmansk. They crossed the border at Petsamo, but after a brief advance, they were stopped by Soviet 14th Army. To the south, Salla was taken, but Finnish and German troops were halted by Soviet reinforcements. In Karelia, Lake Ladoga was reached in July, cutting Soviet forces in half, and by early September, the old border was restored. Leningrad was attacked already in August, where 400 civilians worked to build fortifications. In September, all land routes to the city were cut, but further advance was very costly, so Hitler decided that Leningrad should be starved into submission instead. In the center, summer rainstorms and stiffening Soviet resistance slowed down the German advance. A massive counterattack was launched in early July with 2 mechanized corps, but they were annihilated in a 2-day battle in which 800 tanks were lost. Once again, the Luftwaffe helped out ground units. The 2 panzer groups approached Smolensk from 2 directions, and once the gap was closed, another 300,000 Soviet troops were trapped and 3,000 tanks destroyed, although many escaped. In early August, Stavka, the Soviet High Command, formed the Reserve Front led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, with several new, poorly trained armies. 2 of these armies were ordered to eliminate the German bridgehead at Yelnya, and although initial attacks failed, the Soviets tried again, and by the end of the month, they threatened parts of German 4th Army with encirclement, so the salient was evacuated. This was the first Soviet tactical victory, which boosted morale, but it also weakened their local units. German logistical and supply issues mounted. They needed time to rest and reorganize, while Hitler changed his strategy and decided to focus on the capture of large industrial centers and the oil fields in the Caucasus. His generals wanted Moscow instead, since it was a major transportation, manufacturing, and logistical hub, but even Guderian was unable to convince Hitler, so Army Group Center's panzer forces were sent to the south and north, pausing the offensive on Moscow. In the south, 3 Soviet armies were trapped at Uman, after which the German panzers crossed the rivers Dnieper and Yesna, encircling another 4 armies. Despite this huge success on the ground, the Luftwaffe was running out of steam, while the VVS, the Soviet Air Force, was slowly recovering and started to contest German air superiority. Nonetheless, Army Groups Center and South worked together to attack Kiev. In mid-September, they trapped another 450,000 Soviet troops, and while their own units were now exhausted, this great success made them believe that Moscow could still be taken before the end of the year, despite the previous pause. After the fall of Kiev, Army Group South attacked the Donbass and Crimea, but they first had to stop another counterattack before moving forward. At the end of September, German troops stood in front of Leningrad. They were more than halfway to Moscow, while Kiev was already taken. Before I close, I should also mention that war crimes were already being committed against Soviet prisoners of war and civilians, while political officers, commissars of the Red Army, were usually shot. Einsatzgruppen killing squads conducted massacres of Jews and communists, often with the assistance of local civilians who had anti-Soviet sentiments or wanted revenge for previous killings by the NKVD, Stalin's secret police. Originally, only male Jews were to be executed in this manner, but by late July, women and children were also being massacred. Soviet civilians were deported to Germany for slave labor, gang rape also occurred, and entire villages were eradicated to prevent them from supporting partisans. I will talk about the next phase of the campaign in a future episode. Thank you for watching. See you next time.